I still remember the way the crystal chandelier in the Vancroft's private dining room shimmered, casting a warm, almost ethereal glow over the polished mahogany table. It was Dad's 60th birthday, a milestone, and I wanted it to be perfect. No expense spared, no detail overlooked. I'd personally booked this room, knowing its reputation, knowing the hushed reverence people spoke of the place. It wasn't just a dinner. It was a statement of love for my father and perhaps a quiet statement of my own progress. The cost for the evening, including a custom menu and dedicated service, was a cool $3,000, a figure that barely registered in my annual budget, but one I knew would turn heads in my family. My parents, bless their hearts, looked around with wide eyes, genuinely impressed. Dad kept patting my arm, a small, proud smile playing on his lips. "Claire, this is extraordinary," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Mom, ever the worrier, just squeezed my hand, a silent question in her gaze. "How?" My younger brother, Ryan, always a bit of a follower, whistled low, impressed by the opulent surroundings. He seemed genuinely happy for Dad and for me in that moment. Then there was Megan, my older sister. She sat across from me, a carefully constructed smirk on her face, her eyes darting around the room, not with appreciation, but with suspicion. She wasn't marveling. She was dissecting. Her husband, Mark, a man whose entire personality seemed to be molded from bespoke suits and stock market reports, sat beside her, mirroring her expression. He adjusted his tie, a gesture I'd come to associate with his need to assert superiority. Megan leaned forward, her voice a low, cutting whisper that somehow carried through the hushed elegance of the room. "What is this? Claire? Pretending to be rich again?" Her words, though quiet, were sharp, like tiny needles pricking at the bubble of warmth I'd tried to create for Dad. "Another one of your big deals, I suppose." Booking the most expensive room in the city to impress us. My stomach tightened. I should have expected it. This wasn't new. This was our dance. A familiar, painful waltz we'd been performing for years. Any glimmer of success, any small victory I achieved was immediately met with skepticism, often outright dismissal from Megan and Mark. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. About a narrative they'd constructed about me. A narrative I desperately wanted to shatter. But tonight, it wasn't just about me. It was Dad's birthday. I took a deep breath, forcing a smile. It's Dad's 60th. Megan, I just wanted to make it special. Megan scoffed. A tiny, almost imperceptible sound, but loud enough for me to hear. Special or specially staged. Honestly, Claire, you always overreach. You always pretend to be something you're not. The waiter, a young man with a polite, deferential demeanor, approached our table to pour water. His presence seemed to momentarily silence Megan, but I could feel her eyes and Mark's boring into me. The stage was set, not just for a birthday celebration, but for something far more fraught. Humiliation, perhaps. Or if I was lucky, a long overdue revelation. I just prayed it wouldn't ruin Dad's evening. I glanced at my father, who was now subtly watching us, a flicker of concern creasing his brow. The perfect evening I'd envisioned felt like it was already teetering on the edge of a precipice. The air, once festive, now hummed with an unspoken tension, a silent challenge that had been brewing for far too long. The tension from Megan's opening salvo lingered, a palpable weight around our small table. Before I could even properly respond, Mark, with his typical self-assuredness, decided it was his cue to chime in. He cleared his throat, adjusting his expensive watch, a subtle flex he never missed. "Claire, seriously," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "This consulting job of yours, what exactly do you consult on? How to spend money you don't have?" I felt a familiar flush creep up my neck. My consulting job was, in fact, Holloway Events, a company I'd built from the ground up, a company that was now a recognized leader in its field. But to them, it was always a hobby, a fancy way of saying I was unemployed, or at best, dabbling. They never truly bothered to understand what I did or how much effort, sacrifice, and sheer grit had gone into building it. It was easier for them to dismiss it, to fit it into their preconceived notions of me. Megan leaned over, her voice conspiratorial, as if she were letting Dad in on some grave secret. "Dad, don't encourage her. She probably has a mountain of student debt and her apartment. I bet it's a rental she can barely afford. She just moves money around to look solvent. It's all smoke and mirrors." Mark nodded sagely. "Exactly. Megan and I are transparent. Combined, our salaries are..." "What? Honey? $530,000 a year. Solid, reliable income. We save. We invest. We have a 5-year plan for our Hamptons house. That's how you build real wealth, Claire. Not with these fly-by-night operations." He paused, looking at me with an air of pity. "You should really think about getting a stable job. Maybe something in marketing for a reputable firm. You have a decent eye for aesthetics. You could probably make a comfortable living." My teeth clenched. A comfortable living. They had no idea. The sheer audacity, the blatant dismissal of years of relentless work, the sleepless nights, the enormous risks I'd taken. It was infuriating. But I couldn't snap back. Not tonight. Not in front of Dad. I just kept my gaze steady, trying to project an air of calm I didn't entirely feel. Even Ryan, my younger brother, who I'd always thought was more neutral, more supportive, chimed in, albeit with a softer tone. "Claire, they're just worried about you. I mean, you're always traveling, and these big events. It must cost a lot to put them on. Where does all that money come from? Really? Are you sure you're not? You know, going into debt for appearances. He looked genuinely concerned, and that hurt almost more than Megan's malice. Ryan actually believed their narrative. He believed I was faking it. Yeah, Megan piped up again, seizing on Ryan's doubt. Look at her clothes. Dad. Designer everything. That new car she drives? It's leased. I guarantee it. She's probably maxed out every credit card trying to keep up. It's a house of cards waiting to collapse. Their words were a barrage. Each one a small, calculated hit. They painted a picture of me as irresponsible, deluded, and ultimately a fraud. It wasn't just about money. It was about character. They were systematically dismantling any shred of credibility I might possess in front of our parents. They wanted to expose me, to bring me down to their level, or preferably below it. Their success, in their minds, was real and tangible, built on steady jobs and conventional paths. My success, to them, was an illusion, a dangerous fantasy I was peddling to myself and, by extension, to our family. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier pride fading, replaced by that familiar worry. He looked between Megan, Mark, and me, his eyes pleading for peace, for an end to the thinly veiled accusations. Mom, bless her heart, tried to interject. Now, children, it's Dad's birthday. Let's not talk about money. But her voice was soft, easily overridden. The truth was, she didn't fully understand my business either. And the constant barrage from Megan and Mark had undoubtedly planted seeds of doubt in her mind. I was alone in this, alone against their combined assault, their conviction that I was living a lie, and their absolute certainty that they knew better. And the worst part? A small part of me, buried deep, still craved their approval, their recognition. Tonight, it seemed, I was destined to crave it in vain. The arrival of the appetizers, beautifully presented and smelling divine, did nothing to diffuse the tension. If anything, it seemed to fuel Megan's growing agitation. She pushed a fork through her burrata, not tasting it, her eyes fixed on me. The whispers escalated into a more direct, cutting tone. Seriously, Claire, this has gone on long enough, Megan stated, her voice rising, losing its earlier pretense of being a private family discussion. Now, it was louder, deliberately so, ensuring that the waiters, the other patrons, even the very walls of the private dining room could bear witness to her pronouncements. Stop pretending you have money. You're embarrassing us. You're embarrassing, Dad. Trying to throw this lavish party with funds you clearly don't possess. My blood ran cold. Embarrassing us. That was the core of it. Wasn't it? Not genuine concern. Not love. but the fear that my perceived instability would reflect poorly on them. On Megan, the successful banker. On Mark, the financial guru. On Ryan, the steady, reliable brother. My path was unorthodox. My success, which they refused to acknowledge, was outside their narrow definition of respectable achievement. And that, apparently, was a greater sin than actual failure. Mom, seeing the rising storm, finally found her voice. A gentle but firm plea. Megan, please. This isn't the time or place. Claire booked this for your father. But Mom's intervention, instead of calming Megan, seemed to ignite her further. It was as if she saw it as Mom taking my side, validating my supposed deception. Megan's eyes, usually a calm blue, now sparked with a righteous indignation. She slammed her fork down on the table, the clatter echoing in the suddenly quiet room. Mark predictably chimed in, leaning back in his chair, a smug expression on his face. Honey, you might be right. I've seen it before. People get caught up in the illusion of wealth. Then they end up in deep trouble. Claire, is there something you need to tell us? We can help. You know, we have connections. We can help you manage your debt or find a real job. He offered this last part with an infuriatingly patronizing tone, as if he were extending a lifeline to a drowning child. I felt a cold rage begin to simmer beneath my composure. They weren't just dismissing my efforts. They were actively undermining me, tearing down years of hard work with baseless accusations. They wanted to fit me into a box. The struggling, irresponsible younger sister who needed their guidance, their charity. It was easier for them to believe I was failing spectacularly than to accept that I might be succeeding on a scale they couldn't comprehend. Dad, looking utterly miserable, finally spoke, his voice quiet, filled with a mix of love and palpable worry. Claire, is everything all right? You know we're here for you no matter what. His words, meant to be supportive, twisted in my gut. Even he, after all these years, after seeing me work tirelessly, after witnessing small successes, still held a kernel of doubt. He believed Megan. Or at least he was afraid she might be right. That hurt most of all. The room's tension was a living thing, a coiled snake ready to strike. The pleasant chatter from the main dining room seemed to mock our strained silence. I could feel the weight of their judgment, their pity, their outright scorn. My heart ached, a deep, familiar ache that had been with me since childhood. This was my family, the people who should have celebrated my every triumph, stood by me in every challenge. Instead, they were tearing me down piece by painful piece, convinced of a narrative they had constructed, utterly unwilling to see the truth. But I knew the truth. And it was time. I realized, for the truth to finally speak for itself. My calm exterior was a shield, barely containing the hurricane of emotions swirling within me. The dinner, intended as a celebration of life, had irrevocably become a trial of my own making. A confrontation I had inadvertently set into motion simply by trying to be kind, simply by trying to be myself. The air in the private dining room was thick, almost suffocating with the weight of Megan's accusations and Mark's smug pronouncements. My father's worried glance felt like a betrayal, and Ryan's concerned questions, though softer, still stung. They had built their case, presented their evidence, all circumstantial, all based on their limited perceptions. And now they expected a confession, an admission of my supposed failure. But I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the silence hang, letting their words echo in the space. I met Megan's aggressive stare, then Mark's condescending gaze, and finally Ryan's uneasy eyes. My expression, I hoped, was neutral, unreadable. Inside, a quiet resolve was hardening. This had gone on long enough. Years of being underestimated, of having my achievements minimized, of being treated as the family's flighty, irresponsible dreamer. Tonight, it ended. "The bill," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the heavy silence. "Could we get the bill? Please." A flicker of surprise crossed Megan's face, quickly replaced by a knowing smirk. "Oh, finally, the moment of truth," she muttered under her breath, but loud enough for me to hear. Mark chuckled. A low, dismissive sound. The waiter, sensing the awkwardness, quickly brought the leather-bound check presenter. He placed it discreetly in front of me. I opened it, glancing at the total. $3,475, just as expected. Without a word, I reached into my small clutch bag. My fingers closed around the smooth, heavy plastic. I pulled it out slowly, deliberately. It wasn't a standard Visa or MasterCard. It wasn't even a typical Gold or Platinum American Express. It was matte black, solid, unassuming, yet undeniably distinctive. The American Express Centurion card. I laid it on the table, face up, next to the check. Megan's eyes widened, then narrowed almost instantly. Her smirk returned, more pronounced, more venomous. "Oh, please," she scoffed, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms. "A fake? You bought that online, didn't you? Claire? From some novelty website. You can get anything these days. A fake Rolex. A fake designer bag. Even a fake black card." She laughed. A short, sharp bark that grated on my ears. "Honestly, the lengths you go to, it's pathetic." Mark, ever the expert on all things financial, took his cue. He adjusted his glasses, peering at the card with a feigned air of authority. "Amateur," he declared, shaking his head with a theatrical sigh. "Claire, do you even know what a real Centurion card is? It's invitation only." You need to charge, at a minimum, $250,000 annually. And that's just to qualify for an invitation. Not even considering the initiation fee and annual fees. No offense, but with your event planning gig, there's no way you'd ever qualify. You'd never hit those spending thresholds. He turned to Dad, as if appealing to a jury. It's a status symbol for the ultra-wealthy. Dad. Real millionaires. Not people playing dress-up. Ryan, looking uncomfortable but still clearly swayed by Megan and Mark's expertise, just shook his head. A look of disappointment on his face. He clearly believed them. He believed I was trying to pull a fast one. That I was desperate enough to use a novelty card to pay for Dad's birthday dinner. The collective disbelief and scorn in their eyes was almost unbearable. They weren't just questioning the card. They were questioning my entire identity. The person I had become. They were so convinced of their own narrative, their own assumptions about my life, that they couldn't even entertain the possibility that they might be wrong. Their certainty was absolute. Their judgment unwavering. My parents remained silent. Their faces a mix of confusion and embarrassment. Mom looked like she wanted to disappear under the table. Dad just watched me, a silent plea in his eyes, urging me to explain, to justify myself, to end this escalating nightmare. I didn't offer a single word of defense or explanation. I simply picked up the card, my fingers tracing its smooth, cool surface. Then, with a calm I didn't entirely feel, I handed it to the waiter. Charge the full bill, please, I said, my voice steady, my gaze unwavering as I met Megan's triumphant stare. I could feel the anticipation, the barely contained glee from my sister and brother-in-law. They were absolutely certain of my imminent downfall. They expected the moment of my public humiliation, the final, undeniable proof that I was a fraud. And for a fleeting second, a cold dread snaked through me. What if, somehow, something did go wrong? What if the universe decided to side with them just this once? But then I pushed the doubt away. I knew my worth. I knew my business. And I knew the truth. The waiter took the black card, his expression carefully neutral, and disappeared towards the discreet payment terminal near the front of the private room. The silence that fell over our table was thick, heavy with unspoken anticipation. Megan and Mark exchanged triumphant glances, their smirks growing wider, ready to erupt. Ryan looked away, clearly uncomfortable, but still convinced I was about to be exposed. My parents watched me with a mixture of hope and dread, silently pleading for this agonizing situation to somehow resolve itself. Every second felt like an eternity. I could hear the faint clinking of silverware from the main dining room, the muted murmur of other diners' conversations. In our secluded space, however, only the beating of my own heart seemed audible, a steady drum against the rising tide of their skepticism. I kept my gaze fixed on the entrance, waiting, preparing myself for whatever came next. I knew what should happen. I knew the card was valid, more than valid. but the seed of doubt planted by their relentless accusations still tried to sprout. Finally, the waiter reappeared, his face no longer neutral, but etched with a visible trace of discomfort. He approached our table, avoiding eye contact with me, and instead directed his words to the general space in front of me. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," he began, his voice lowered, almost apologetic. "Your card. It appears to have an issue. It was declined." The words hung in the air, a bell tolling the moment of my supposed defeat. For a split second, there was stunned silence. Then, as if on cue, Megan erupted. A loud, harsh bark of laughter burst from her lips, echoing off the elegant walls of the room. It wasn't a gentle chuckle. It was a triumphant, mocking roar. "Ha! See, I told you it was fake. Oh my God. Claire, this is too perfect." She was practically doubled over, tears of mirth streaming down her face, pointing at me with a trembling finger. Her fake black card got declined. The fake millionaire gets exposed. Mark, not to be outdone, joined in, his laughter a booming, hearty sound that filled the room. "I knew it," he declared, slapping his thigh. "I knew it was too good to be true. All that bravado, all that pretense, for a piece of plastic bought off the internet. Oh, this is rich, Claire. Truly rich. You really thought you could pull that off?" He shook his head in mock pity, his eyes twinkling with malicious satisfaction. "The Centurion card. Really? You should have gone with a gold card. At least that's plausible." Even Ryan, who had initially just looked disgusted, now let out a small, uncomfortable laugh. It wasn't as cruel as Megan's or Mark's, but it was still a laugh, and it still felt like a punch to the gut. He clearly believed this was the ultimate proof of my deceit, of my failed attempts to keep up appearances. My parents looked utterly mortified. Mom's face was ashen, her hand flying to her mouth. Dad slumped back in his chair, his earlier worry now replaced by a crushing embarrassment and disappointment. Their faces, twisted with shame, were perhaps the hardest to bear. They believed I had disgraced them, that I had tried to pull a stunt and failed spectacularly. The waiter stood there fidgeting, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding before him. He kept glancing between me and the now laughing pair, probably wondering if he should call security. But I remained silent. I kept my composure, refusing to let the burning humiliation show on my face. My heart was pounding. Yes, a wild rhythm against my ribs. But my expression was carefully blank. I just watched them, my sister and brother-in-law, reveling in their victory, completely oblivious to the far deeper currents at play. Let them laugh, I thought. Let them enjoy their moment of triumph. They had no idea what was truly happening. No idea of the quiet storm that was about to break. My silence wasn't an admission of guilt. It was a strategic pause, A breath held before the inevitable. Devastating truth was revealed. They had built their entire argument on assumptions, and they were about to realize how spectacularly wrong they had been. Their laughter would soon die, replaced by a very different sound. The sound of Megan and Mark's triumphant laughter filled the private dining room. A harsh, grating symphony of schadenfreude. Ryan's uneasy chuckles. My parents' mortified silence. It all converged into a single, painful moment of humiliation. The waiter stood frozen, the declined black card still in his hand, looking utterly lost. I maintained my poker face, though inside a cold fury was building, a determination to let the truth speak for itself. Just as Megan was about to launch into another round of "I told you so," a new figure suddenly appeared in the doorway of our private room. He moved with a sense of urgency, his expression a mix of concern and profound apology. It was Mr. Dubois, the general manager of the Vancroft, a man I knew well, a man I had personally worked with on numerous large-scale events. Mr. Dubois was a man of impeccable bearing, always calm, always collected. But now, his composure seemed slightly ruffled. He was holding a small tablet, scrolling through it rapidly, his eyes scanning the screen. He bypassed the waiter, bypassed my family, and walked directly to me. "Ms. Holloway," he exclaimed, his voice clear, cutting through the tail end of Megan's snide remarks. He placed a hand gently on my arm, his face etched with genuine distress. "Miss Holloway, I am so incredibly sorry about this. There seems to have been a terrible misunderstanding." Megan's laughter died abruptly, replaced by a confused frown. Mark stopped mid-chuckle, his face twisting into an expression of bewilderment. Ryan looked up, intrigued by the GM's sudden, direct address to me. My parents, still looking mortified, exchanged a quick, bewildered glance. Mr. Dubois turned to the waiter, his tone firm but not unkind. "John, I apologize. There's no issue with Ms. Holloway's card. In fact, it's quite the opposite." He then turned back to me, his voice resuming its deferential, apologetic tone. "Ms. Holloway, your card was flagged by our system. Not because it was declined, but because our accounting department still owes you a substantial amount. The system recognized your card and froze the transaction as a precaution." He paused, glancing at the tablet, then back at my family, whose expressions had shifted from triumph to utter confusion. Mr. Dubois cleared his throat. "Ms. Holloway, I sincerely apologize for the error on our part. We still owe you approximately $500,000 from last month's catering contracts. Your multiple events, particularly the extensive corporate gala for Sterling, Inc., and the diplomatic reception for the UN delegation, incurred significant fees. Our finance department has been trying to reconcile the final payment. The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow to Megan and Mark's smug superiority. $500,000. Mr. Dubois repeated for emphasis, his eyes now sweeping over my stunned family. We still owe you $500,000. The silence that followed was absolute, deafening. Megan's mouth was slightly open, her face draining of color. Mark's jaw had dropped, his eyes wide with disbelief. His earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Ryan stared, his confusion giving way to a dawning, incredulous realization. My father, who had been slumped in his chair, suddenly sat bolt upright. He looked at me, then at Mr. Dubois, then back at me. His voice barely a whisper, thick with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. $500,000. Mom just looked between us all, her eyes darting from Mr. Dubois to me, her mind clearly struggling to process the impossible sum, the unthinkable reversal of fortune. I finally allowed a small, unreadable smile to play on my lips. The silence was exquisite. The table had turned, and the laughter was gone, replaced by a stunned, gaping disbelief. The manager, oblivious to the family drama he had just inadvertently detonated, simply offered me another sincere apology. Please, Ms. Holloway, allow me to personally ensure this is resolved immediately. And, of course, tonight's dinner is entirely on the house. Our sincerest apology for this inconvenience. He then discreetly handed the black card back to me, its sleek, matte surface feeling even more substantial in my hand. I took the card, the weight of it suddenly imbued with a new, unspoken significance. The family, still frozen in their disbelief, finally understood. Their entire narrative about my fake wealth, my hidden debt, my pathetic attempts to impress them had just been obliterated by a single, undeniable truth. And the best part? I hadn't even had to say a word. The restaurant manager had done it for me. The look on Megan's face, the utter shock, was more satisfying than any witty retort I could have ever conjured. The manager, Mr. Dubois, after his sincere apologies and offering the dinner on the house, discreetly withdrew, leaving behind a silence far heavier and more potent than before. My family sat utterly stunned, their faces a tableau of disbelief, confusion, and dawning horror. Megan's mouth was still slightly agape, her eyes darting between me and the now empty doorway, as if waiting for Mr. Dubois to reappear and declare it all a practical joke. Mark, the self-proclaimed financial expert, looked like someone had just pulled the rug out from under his entire worldview. Ryan just stared at me, his brow furrowed, 1,000 questions warring in his eyes. My parents, especially Dad, looked like they were trying to piece together a puzzle that had just exploded in their faces. I let the silence linger, a silent testament to the magnitude of the revelation. Then I leaned forward slightly, placing my black card back into my clutch, my movements calm and deliberate. Mom. Dad. I began, my voice soft but clear, cutting through the lingering disbelief. Megan. Mark. Ryan. There's something I haven't really talked about in detail. I took a deep breath. My consulting job, as you've all so kindly called it, is actually a company. It's called Holloway Events, and it's not small. I paused, letting that sink in. Their eyes were glued to me, their expressions unreadable now, beyond simple scorn or pity. Holloway Events, I continued, choosing my words carefully, not to gloat, but to simply state facts, to lay bare the truth they had so stubbornly refused to see. It's the largest luxury event planning company on the East Coast. We specialize in high-end, bespoke events. Everything from corporate galas and international conferences to exclusive private celebrations for high-net-worth individuals. Megan shifted uneasily in her seat. Mark, however, finally found his voice. A strained, almost breathless whisper. Largest on the East Coast? That's a huge claim. Claire, who are your clients? I met his gaze. Unflinching. Our client roster includes Fortune 100 firms. We handled the UN's 75th anniversary gala last year, a multi-day event across 3 venues. The Met Museum's annual fundraising dinner? That's us. We regularly work with ambassadors, tech billionaires, and prominent philanthropic organizations. The event? Mr. Dubois just referenced. The one with the outstanding $500,000 payment. That was for Sterling Inc. Its annual shareholder summit and a concurrent diplomatic reception we managed. Their eyes widened. They were no longer sneering, no longer scoffing. They were listening. Truly listening for the first time in years. Last year, I continued, my voice steady, relaying the numbers I knew by heart. The numbers that represented years of blood, sweat, and tears. Holloway Events generated $47 million in revenue. And for this year, our projections are closer to $68 million, potentially more, depending on a few upcoming contracts we're finalizing. Ryan let out a soft, involuntary gasp. My parents just stared, their faces a mixture of pride, shock, and a faint, lingering confusion. Megan looked like she'd been struck by lightning, her face pale. Mark, for once, was speechless, his financial wizardry unable to compute the figures I was so casually stating. And my personal net worth, I added, knowing this would be the final, undeniable nail in the coffin of their assumptions. It's currently around $28 million. That includes my company equity, real estate investments, and other assets. The words hung in the air, a resounding echo of success, wealth, and undeniable achievement. The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't the silence of anticipation for my downfall, but the stunned, heavy silence of absolute shock. Their carefully constructed narrative, The one where I was the irresponsible dreamer, the struggling fake, had just been obliterated into a million pieces. The truth, in all its quiet, undeniable power, had finally spoken. And it was far louder and far more devastating to them than any insult or argument I could have ever uttered. They were no longer pitying me. They were staring at me as if I were a stranger, a formidable figure they had completely, spectacularly misjudged. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, truly acknowledged, not for their approval, but for the sheer weight of my own accomplishments. The numbers hung in the air. $47 million. $68 million. $28 million. Each figure, a cold, a hard fact that chipped away at their carefully constructed illusion of me. Megan's phone, which she had been nervously fiddling with, suddenly vibrated. She glanced at it. Then her eyes widened, fixed on the screen. I watched her, a quiet satisfaction blossoming in my chest. She wasn't looking at social media. She was searching. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her face paling further with each scroll. Finally, she let out a small, choked sound, a gasp of pure disbelief. Her eyes lifted from the phone, meeting mine, filled with a mixture of shock and something akin to fear. "Forbes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Claire Holloway, 30 under 30, event planning mogul." She trailed off, unable to complete the sentence, the words themselves a bitter, unpalatable truth. She had undoubtedly just found one of the many articles featuring me, the ones that celebrated my company's meteoric rise, my innovative approach, my influence in the industry, the very recognition they had always denied me, now staring them in the face from a highly reputable source. Mark, still reeling, muttered, You employ 200 people." It wasn't a question, but a statement of dawning comprehension. His banker's brain, finally processing the scale of my enterprise, was struggling to reconcile it with the fake wealth narrative he had so enthusiastically promoted. He was likely calculating the payroll, the overhead, the sheer logistical complexity of managing such a workforce. I offered a small, knowing smile. "Actually, Mark," I corrected gently, "it's 237 full-time employees. And during peak season, we can have up to 500 contractors on various projects. We have offices in New York, Miami, and soon, London." That detail seemed to hit them even harder. Not just the numbers, but the tangible, sprawling reality of what I had built. The offices, the staff, the international reach. It was all so far beyond their world of corporate cubicles and predictable promotions. My parents, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally looked at me, their faces etched with a profound sense of awe and confusion. Mom's eyes welled up with tears, her voice a barely audible whisper. "But why? Claire, why didn't you tell us? Why did you keep all of this from us?" The pain in her voice was clear, a mix of hurt and bewilderment. This was the question I had anticipated, the one that cut deepest. I looked at my mother, then at my father, whose own eyes were now glistening. "Because," I answered, my voice softening, letting the raw, honest truth finally out. "Because I wanted to be loved for me, not for my money, not for my success. I wanted to be your daughter, Mom and Dad. I wanted to be Megan's sister, Ryan's sister. Without all of this," I gestured vaguely around the room, encompassing the grand setting, the expensive food, and the heavy air of judgment that had preceded the revelation. Every time I tried to talk about my business, it was dismissed. It was called a hobby, a phase. Any small success was met with skepticism. I quickly learned that if I talked about my accomplishments, it created a rift, a tension. It seemed easier to just let you believe what you wanted to believe, to let you keep your comfortable narrative, even if it meant I was always the underestimated one, the one you worried about. My words hung in the air, a quiet indictment, but also a vulnerable confession. The room was utterly silent. Megan's face was now a mask of shame, her earlier triumph replaced by a crushing realization of her own cruelty. Mark looked utterly chastened, his usual swagger completely gone. Ryan's eyes were wide with understanding, a silent apology in their depths. Dad finally reached across the table, his hand trembling slightly as he covered mine. His eyes were moist, brimming with emotion. "Sweetheart," he choked out, his voice thick. "My God. Claire, I'm so incredibly proud of you. I had no idea." His grip tightened, a silent acknowledgement of his own blindness, his own misjudgment. "Megan," her voice now barely a whisper, looked at her hands, twisting them together. I lectured you about money," she stammered. "When you're worth more than Mark and I will ever make combined. I'm so sorry. Claire. I was so wrong. So unbelievably, horribly wrong." The words sounded genuine, stripped of their usual arrogance, weighed down by genuine remorse. I looked at my sister, the girl who had always been competitive, always felt the need to prove herself superior. A small, sad smile touched my lips. "You weren't wrong to care, Megan," I told her genuinely. "You just didn't know the truth. You saw what you expected to see. I understand that. We all make assumptions." Then I turned back to my parents, a different kind of warmth spreading through me. This wasn't about revenge. It was about healing, about building a new foundation of understanding. "Actually, Mom, Dad," I said, a playful note entering my voice. "I have something else to tell you. Since we're clearing the air." I grinned. "I've already started planning something very special for your 35th anniversary next year. A gala, 100 guests, unlimited budget. Consider it my gift." A real one this time, Mom gasped, tears now openly streaming down her face. Dad's smile was wide, full of pure, unadulterated joy. For the first time that evening, the heavy tension lifted, replaced by a genuine, unforced warmth. The truth had not only been revealed, but it had also finally begun to heal. The revelation of the anniversary gala, a gift born not of obligation, but of genuine love and a desire to make amends, seemed to shatter the last vestiges of awkwardness. Mom, tears still glistening in her eyes, reached across the table, her hand finding mine and squeezing it tightly. "Oh, Claire," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You didn't have to do that. Just knowing all of this is enough." But I could see the delighted sparkle in her eyes, the dream of a grand celebration she'd never dared to imagine. Dad's smile was wide and genuine, radiating pure joy, completely free of the worry that had clouded his face earlier. Suddenly, the waiter, who had been hovering discreetly, reappeared with a chilled bottle of champagne, clearly instructed by Mr. Dubois. He popped the cork with a soft thump, the fizzing sound a welcome counterpoint to the earlier tension. He poured generous flutes for everyone. Dad raised his glass, his eyes fixed on me, no longer seeing the struggling daughter, but the extraordinary woman I had become. "To Claire," he announced, his voice clear and ringing with pride. "Not for her millions, not for her incredible company, but for my daughter, for who you are, for your strength, your spirit, and your immense heart. We are so incredibly proud of you, sweetheart." Mom chimed in, her voice still a little shaky, but filled with warmth. "To Claire, my amazing daughter." Even Ryan, whose earlier laughter had stung, raised his glass, a genuine smile replacing his earlier discomfort. "To Claire, you really blew us all away." He looked genuinely impressed, a newfound respect shining in his eyes. Megan, still looking slightly chastened, but with a softening in her features I hadn't seen in years, slowly raised her glass as well. She looked directly at me, a flicker of something akin to admiration in her gaze. "To Claire," she murmured, her voice softer, humbler than I had ever heard it. "And to the fact that I was completely, utterly wrong. I owe you a huge apology, Claire, for everything." Mark, who had remained mostly silent since the big reveal, now cleared his throat. "Claire," he began, a rare sincerity in his tone. I was way out of line. I based my judgment on nothing but assumptions and a complete lack of information. Your success is truly remarkable, and I genuinely apologize for my arrogance." It wasn't a full, heartfelt apology, perhaps, but for Mark, it was a seismic shift, an admission of error I never thought I'd hear. I smiled, a real, unburdened smile that reached my eyes. The weight of years of misjudgment, of feeling invisible and misunderstood, was slowly lifting. "Thank you," I said simply, genuinely touched by their newfound humility. "It means a lot." We clinked glasses, the crystal chiming melodically, a sound of harmony replacing the earlier discord. The conversation that followed was different. It wasn't just small talk. It was an earnest attempt to connect, to understand. My parents wanted to know everything about Holloway events, about my travels, my challenges, my vision. Ryan asked intelligent questions, genuinely curious about the intricacies of running such a large business. Even Megan, despite her earlier discomfort, asked about specific client events, expressing a newfound interest that felt surprisingly genuine. "You know," I said, looking around the table, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over me. "Sometimes the best gift isn't luxury or wealth, or even a fancy birthday dinner. As wonderful as this is," I paused, meeting each of their gazes, "it's being fully, authentically yourself. And finally, truly being seen for who you are, without judgment, without needing to prove anything." The dinner, which had started as a battlefield, had transformed into a celebration not just of Dad's birthday, but of truth, of understanding, and of a fragile but real reconciliation. The food, which I had barely noticed before, now tasted exquisite. The champagne bubbled with the effervescence of new beginnings. The chandelier still shimmered, but now its light felt less like a spotlight on a trial and more like a warm, encompassing glow of acceptance. The true gift. I realized I wasn't the $500,000 the restaurant owed me or even the grand anniversary party I'd promised. It was the simple, profound joy of being truly seen and loved by my family. Not for what I had, but for who I was. And that, in itself, was priceless. The quiet strength I had always carried, the resilience forged in years of being underestimated, had finally brought me to this moment of quiet power, emotional closure, and perhaps the beginning of a genuine forgiveness. The evening wound down, infused with a newfound lightness. The champagne flowed, not excessively, but steadily, raising spirits and softening the edges of past hurts. Dad, still beaming, kept reaching over to pat my arm, his eyes reflecting a pride that finally felt unburdened. He didn't just see the successful businesswoman. He saw his daughter, the little girl he'd always loved, but now fully realized, fully understood. The air was thick with whispered apologies from Megan, gentle reassurances from Mom, and a genuine camaraderie from Ryan that I hadn't felt in years. Later, as we were preparing to leave, Dad pulled me aside, his voice low and earnest. "Claire," he said, his hand still on my arm, "I'm so sorry we never saw it. Never truly understood what you were building. We were so caught up in our own ideas of success, of what we thought safe was. You've taught us a big lesson tonight." He squeezed my hand, a silent promise of a different kind of relationship moving forward. "Thank you for everything." For this dinner, for the anniversary, but most of all, for being you. I smiled. A deep, genuine smile that started in my heart and spread across my face. It's okay, Dad, I told him, the words coming easily, truly felt. We all learn, right? And I learned a lot tonight, too, about what really matters. Megan approached us, her usual confident demeanor replaced by a quiet vulnerability. Claire, she began, fiddling with the strap of her purse. Can we talk tomorrow? Properly? I really want to understand your business. And everything. Her tone was tentative, a stark contrast to her earlier declarations. I'd like that, Megan, I said, and I truly meant it. This wasn't about holding grudges. It was about opening doors, about building a bridge where there had only been walls. As we walked out of the Vancroft, the crisp night air felt fresh and invigorating. The city lights twinkled, no longer a backdrop to my humiliation, but a shining beacon of possibilities. The expensive car waiting for me outside, the luxury apartment I would return to, the thriving business I had built. None of it felt like something I needed to hide anymore. It was simply part of who I was. I knew this wasn't an overnight fix. Family dynamics were complex, deeply ingrained. There would be more conversations, more adjustments, probably even more misunderstandings down the line. But tonight, a fundamental shift had occurred. The truth, in its quiet, unassuming power, had cut through years of assumptions and judgment. They had seen the success. Yes, but more importantly, they had been forced to see me, the woman behind the numbers, the sister, the daughter, who had simply wanted to be loved and accepted for herself. My smile deepened. Sometimes the best gift, I mused aloud, mostly to myself as I got into the car, isn't luxury or wealth, or even the grandest gesture. It's being fully, authentically yourself, and finding the courage to let that truth shine. The journey to that realization had been painful, fraught with betrayal and emotional neglect. But the destination felt profoundly liberating. The quiet power, the emotional closure, the tentative steps towards forgiveness. These were the real gifts of the night. If this story touched you, or resonated with your own experiences, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video. It truly helps me develop better and create more content. We'd love